Isaac Sarason is a skilled hacker, formerly employed by British Telecom-Sprint. When his health failed, Isaac did the only thing he could think of. He ran. He found a haven in a working-class district of the city known as Little Russia. There Isaac took on a new name, Ishmael. He then became embroiled in the affairs of a brutal member of the Lamadiza organized crime family, known as Leo. Convinced by his longtime friend Frankie to flee from his commitments to the Lamadiza family, Isaac found himself hunted by the ruthless Leo. On a rooftop, far from witnesses, Leo murdered Frankie. Only through the use of his skills as a hacker was Isaac able to drive Leo off. Wounded, alone, and far from help, Isaac depended on the kindness of strangers. One stranger, a burqa-wearing doctor known as Fatima, took pity on Isaac and helped him make his way to the mysterious Star X line. At the end of all hope, they found the Star X line and the slim promise that the enigmatic beings behind the Star X could save Isaac from the implants which destroyed his life. What do you do when those who saved you have recorded everything you are? What do you do when your every action is tracked by the Keylogger? Colbyjack.net is proud to present Firmware Keylogger, the third installment in the firmware pentology by Colbytrax. 00-10-10. All server rooms were the same. Raised floors and drop ceilings were the hallmark of a truly professional setup. There was a constant, almost a lullaby, drone coming from the air conditioning. One never had to worry about heating his server room. The computers were quite capable of keeping everything nice and toasty. I always loved server rooms, but they were a disappearing beast. Centuries of Kumi's law saw to that. Kumi's law was a prediction that the number of computations per joule of energy would double about every 1.5 years. While the pattern had held for the first half-century of computing, the trend dipped closer to doubling every 5 years in later centuries. What this meant was that the battery in a modern phone was capable of powering calculations at a rate which equaled the entire computing power of the planet in the year 2000. Naturally, if a phone could run processors capable of operating entire industries, imagine what would be possible with a home gaming unit, or my lowly Opemapo Null. Well, not all of my Opemapo's energy was used in computations. It was safe to say that the raw processing power of that unit represented the entire world's processing capacity sometime in the early 2000s. And to think I had used somewhere north of 6 kilowatt hours of computation power over a month of extreme hacking. That was a ludicrous amount of computational power, to be sure. Phone batteries ran at about 1 kilowatt hour and would power the average unit for up to 3 months. Through the use of microgenerators powered by the motions of the user, it was rare for a phone to need an actual charging during its operational life. What this all amounted to was that dedicated servers with their own dedicated room with dedicated cooling equipment were as rare as honest crooks or non-obsessed hackers. What led me to this particular room was a trail of paperwork which verified it existed, and a tracing of my own data trail. While the data kept circling back on itself, it always became muddled in the same address block. The block mapped to the Greater Bingham Airport, BGM to the locals traditionally because of its ancient airline routing letters, which was a complex split between a vast green space, BGM Park, and the remnants of the fixed-wing airport, BGM proper. Surrounded on all sides by 50-plus story residential buildings, mostly condos, with a few of the Corps' better hotels thrown in for good measure, BGM Park was said to be the modern usurper to the title, the city's park. The idea she was stealing it away from the venerable old lady of parks, Central Park, heralded a shift in city culture from the boroughs to the core. The airport, BGM, was a VTOL-only port, servicing air taxis, cruise blimps, and of course, city helicopters, be they police or otherwise. Frankie and I had gone there a couple of times with Mara and some friends of hers from work. Her work, not mine. Would you expect anyone from my team to even want to see the sun more often than they had to? Anyway, it was early May, I believe the 5th, some Nipponese or Mexican holiday which was marked by kite flying with the kids in the park during the day and pub crawling through Pueblito wearing sombreros and drinking large quantities of sake and tequila. I remembered the crazy sight of the Holland Atlantic Cruises airship Princess Atalantia slowly passing overhead on her way to the berths at BGM. As it passed, I heard the squeals of delight from the children around us as airplanes made of Holland Atlantic stationery and disposable flexible newsreaders spiraled down from the observation decks of the Atalantia. I remember laughing hard as I realized the plane that came to my feet was a BTS Flexi Reader, a device with many exploitable security flaws, which I had become very well versed in during my many attempts to beat the Brotherhood's desire to use them as anything but a paid advertising platform. But there it was, at my feet, used in a manner which, no matter how good the DRM, I would never be able to stop. I picked up the Flexi Reader and watched as it shifted from Deutsch to English as it recognized my biometrics from the BTS user database. A moment later, it was showing me a cacophony of news stories and adverbs, all jumbled up thanks to the folds and distortions of the plane's design. I tossed it into the air as a second wave of paper airplanes spiraled through the spring air. If I had a head, I would have shaken it violently. The spiral of memories and data clumped together in my thought processes, blocking me from concentrating in the server room which contained me. The room was unimpressive. 4 custom cases stood before me labeled 00 through 11 like white obelisks. A handful of lights flashed on the surface in a dance of reassurance for those who installed them. The lights held no value to me. They just showed I had power and coolant. The lights were something added to make the suits who buy and inspect technology feel good about purchasing something expensive with no moving parts or verifiable output. I was running a cybernetic maintenance assistant, CMA, a multi-armed contraption about the height of a 5-year-old child. The CMA, really an industrial maintenance and logistic assistant with extended wire maintenance capabilities model 75 EWM, was designed especially for large data centers. Its extended capabilities referred to a pair of wire ferrets housed on its back. The wire ferrets were the real hands of this particular CMA. The wire ferrets were small. I assumed they were no larger than real ferrets, though I hadn't bothered to check the veracity of that statement, and designed to work independent of the CMA proper. Each wire ferret was armed with diamond-tipped teeth, hardened titanium claws, and a reservoir of nearly a half-mile of high-density data cable, or alternately 2 yards of high-voltage power cable. The wire ferrets were capable of burrowing through solid bedrock, as well as patching cables down to a thickness measured in nanometers. A highly trained operator with a pair of wire ferrets could install cable anywhere in the world without worrying about the infrastructure that surrounded the job site. That was exactly what I wanted. I had a lot of wire to run and not a lot of time. 30 yards beneath the server room which housed my consciousness was another room nearly identical to the one my CMA stood within. That room was not an active server room, merely a warehouse space containing 52 Cyberdyne G476NN server cabinets. It was to this room the wire ferrets were tunneling, high-density cable spooling out behind them. The wire ferrets' targets were cabinets, which were the same as those which housed my consciousness in the server room. I only needed 4, initially, but having 48 spares wouldn't be bad either. I pictured the server storage via a security camera. A quartet of CMAs, brothers of the one I now rode, were busy setting up 4 of the backup G476NN servers in the center of the storage space. Along the back wall of the warehouse stood a line of 24 CMA Model 75 EWMs, enough CMAs and wire weasels to rewire the BTS main switching station in a weekend. What the hell was StarX doing with so much hardware? And where were they getting the money for this? The G476NNs were multi-million jewel boxes, and the CMA 75 EWMs cost somewhere north of the low 6 figures. Then there were the cubic yards of space. From my calculations, there was enough infrastructure buried beneath the BGM airport to run the city. Then I accessed the floor plans for the BGM Center. That is what the architects had called it in the plans, and I saw there was room for 64 server rooms. Only a half dozen were in use currently, but it was obvious someone was planning on deploying a large number of AIs in the near future. Based on accepted standards of redundancy and server maintenance, it would not be out of the ordinary to keep such a large number of spares on hand. If one were planning on running 64 server rooms, or were in the process of assembling 64 AIs. Bulk orders, when one needed a large number of servers, made complete sense. The G476NN servers were special order units. Entire industries could be run off of distributed networks of redundant processors. A network instead of a single fixed box was the norm in all but the most specialized situations. Even at BTS, the majority of the so-called computers were actually chips contained within the various switches working as a form of distributed hive mind. Why use one large box when you could have an army of individual chips with built-in redundancies where the loss of any single node would mean no more than the loss of a single neuron? When coupled with modern, high-density distributed storage systems utilizing a virtual RAID configuration, the level of data redundancy became mind-boggling. The whole system of redundant nodes sharing resources across the web of independent processors and data storage units made one wonder how much computing capacity it took to keep me running. As I opened the cabinet on my 1.0 case and released the wire ferrets to perform their assigned tasks, I took a moment to check the case's metrics. The cabinet used 350 kilowatts every hour, an operating cost of 10 joules. For those 10 joules of hard currency, the cabinet would output 750 zeta flops every second. That is, each cabinet in this room, of which there were 4, were capable of performing 750 times 10 to the 21st power floating point operations per second. Seeing as the human brain is capable of approximately an exaflop of operations per second, which is 10 to the 18th power worth of calculations, it would take 750,000 people to equal the computing power in one of the G476NN servers. I used 4 of them. I used as many operations per second as 3 million people. What were they wasting so much computing power on? That many operations to run one mind seemed absurd, considering what I had done within the limits of a normal human brain. A waste of computing resources on such a scale was something I just couldn't abide within a program, even if that program was me. I know it shouldn't have made me happy to know I was such a processor hog, but it did. There was so much I could do with such overarching processor usage. But beyond that was the realization that it should be possible to optimize my code and create a more streamlined, efficient, and portable version of myself. If I were to survive the next few days in a version I would wish to be known as, it would have to be in a more streamlined form. If I still possessed my human weaknesses, this would have been impossible, but as a self-aware cybernetic entity with near unlimited computing capacities, it was not only possible, but even probable that I could succeed in the time given. The microphones on my CMA's hull, as well as those contained within the wire weasels, detected a subtle increase in fan rotation, gallons of coolant pumped per minute, and adjustments being made by the server room's HVAC systems. The G476NN servers were doing something they rarely did. They were heating up. I never realized it, but until I saw my cabinets and read my energy requirements, I had not really believed I was a being of electrons and quantum switches. It was now real. I now knew my real limits, and the shards of my personality were bent on utilizing every iota of computing power allotted to us. While I could mask the symptoms of my heightened activity, there was no way I could prevent the IT department of the StarX project from realizing what I was doing. That wouldn't matter in the long run. It was Friday afternoon, and we were scheduled for shutdown in 2 hours. We wouldn't need more than 20 minutes to prepare. Firmware Keylogger is the 3rd book in the firmware pentology. That's 5 books, if you must know. It begins where Firmware Proxy ends, which in turn followed on the heels of Firmware Hijacked. So you haven't heard or read Firmware Hijacked or Proxy, this would be a great time to head on over to Colbyjack.net and either download the podcast on the audio side, read the episodes on the visual side, or download the Colbyjack Sunday Reader issues 1 through 46 in your choice of either EPUB or Mobi. Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and Keylogger are all available in ebook versions from our store at shop.colbyjack.net, amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com, and smashwords.com. Just search for Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. I'm the only one. A complete audiobook version of both Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and soon Keylogger is available for download through our shop as well. If you don't need any stuff, but would like to support our work, drop on by Colbyjack.net and hit the pretty little donate button conveniently located on the right-hand side of the blog roll. If you're on a smaller screen, the bottom will be found at the bottom of the page. Firmware Keylogger is released under a Creative Commons, non-commercial, attribution, share-alike license. Do what you want with it. Just don't sell it, and always tell people where it came from. If you received this from a friend and want more information about Colbyjack.net and our split personality website, just drop on over to Colbyjack.net and select either the audio or visual side. The audio side carries our podcast, while the visual side carries our writings. Whichever side catches your fancy is fine with us. We're of two minds about the whole thing anyway. I do mostly Twitter, so if you do the tweets and want to follow me, I'm Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. Thank you once again. Remember to be fabulous and have a wonderful week.